Greetings, friends. You are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine as of February 22nd, 2025. Before we begin, I would like to sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps the channel grow. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. Now let's move on to the front line. Very intense fighting is underway. The main combat operations today are unfolding in the Sudzha Bulge area. I remind you that over the past few days, a significant amount of contradictory information has been coming from the Basovka-Novoye area. Cartographers have been adjusting maps, some removing details, others adding them. Overall, this is currently the epicenter of the fighting. By the end of February 22, a significant number of predominantly pro-Russian mapping services have marked the territory of the settlement of Novoye, and according to various sources, this small village has now come fully under the control of Russian forces. The Ukrainian side, meanwhile, is attempting to gather forces in the Basovka area to stabilize the front line and prevent further advances by Russian formations toward the H07 highway. They are currently trying to establish a main defensive node here, as if Russian forces managed to push Ukrainian troops out of Basovka toward Yenakievka. The Russian army could effectively cut off the H07 highway and the settlement of Sudzha. In this case, the entire Sudzha grouping of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, UAF, could find itself at least operationally encircled. However, such an operational encirclement might not occur, as despite the possible physical control of the H07 highway, the Ukrainian side still retains several roads leading through Melovoye, Kurilovka, and further toward Sudzha, and then through Mokritske toward the settlement of Sumy. That is, there is still a relatively wide corridor, but if we talk about the southeastern part, a large number of geolocations have been reported from here. Videos show the Russian side leveling forested areas using FAB 3000 bombs. In these frames, you can see another strike, after which it is very likely that, if there were any Ukrainian armed forces positions in this small grove, they are likely gone after such a strike. The video itself, of course, makes one think about many things, but the most important aspect is not the footage itself, but the intensity of the strikes on this section of the front. Over the past 2 days, FAB 3000 bombs have been falling here more frequently than rain or snow over the same area. Almost every grove, every corner is being leveled, and this clearly indicates that the Russian side is planning a large-scale offensive aimed at reaching another potential supply route that the UAF grouping might be planning to use to support its units in Sudzha. In the near future, a major battle for the Kursk Bulge will begin. Additionally, the Russian side advancing from Plekhovo plans to conclude the battle for the settlement of Kurilovka-Melovoye and move toward the next highway, including in the direction of the settlement of Guevo, again aiming to reach the state border and finally close the encirclement around the UAF grouping located in the Sudzha agglomeration. Apart from the movement at the southern base of the bulge, Russian units are also advancing in the area of the settlement of Cherkasskaya Porochnaya. Today, the Ukrainian side has published a significant number of geolocations in the form of FPV drone strikes and artillery strikes on Russian assault units moving freely through the territory of Cherkasskaya Porochnaya. Here, there is a long video, about a minute and a half, showing numerous episodes, some of which have been geolocated. Strikes were carried out against Russian units in the southern and eastern parts, as well as along the reservoir. Based on the footage published by the Ukrainian side, we have effectively marked the territory between Fanzayevka and Cherkasskaya Porochnaya. Just yesterday, these areas were considered partially under the control of Ukrainian armed forces units and partially contested. Today, however, there is no doubt that the fighting for Cherkasskaya Porochnaya is either nearing its end or will begin shortly. That is, gradually, the noose around Ukrainian units here is tightening. Next, we move to the northern Kupiansk direction, where very important footage has been received from the settlement of Topoly. Today, Ukrainian sources have published videos showing objective control footage of strikes on Russian units within the settlement itself. I remind you that a few days ago, various cartographers had already marked the map in favor of the Russian Federation without any geolocations or references. Today, however, objective control footage has emerged, based on which we have marked a significant portion of the settlements as under the control of the Russian armed forces. At the moment, if we summarize, this bridgehead is approximately 20 kilometers wide along the front. The Russian side will begin moving in a western direction with the aim of initiating combat operations and the third battle for the settlement of Lyman. Additionally, fighting continues in the area of the settlement of Torska, where Russian artillery is gradually leveling the settlement, indicating preparations for an offensive. Over the past 2 to 3 weeks, the main combat operations have been focused on the settlement of Yampolivka. Now, after the clearing of Yampolivka, Russian units are gradually shifting their focus to this small village, the last village located on the Russian side of the Zherebets River. Next, we move to the northern direction, and based on geolocations, it can be assumed that something is brewing here. Let's start with the fact that today, a large number of mapping services and various sources have noted the effective conclusion of the battle for Belogorovka. Despite the fact that over the past 6 months, Russian sources, including the Ministry of Defense, have repeatedly reported the final clearing of this settlement, it appears that this has either just happened or is about to happen. There are reports that some bunker or serious fortified area located in this part of the slag heap has come under the control of the Russian army, which in turn means a breakdown in the Ukrainian armed forces UAF defense in this sector. The UAF will no longer be able to hold Belogorovka and will be forced to retreat. Slightly to the south, in the area of Belaya Gora, there is also minor progress by Russian formations. Footage has been published of FPV drone strikes on Russian units attempting to expand their control zone toward the settlements of Grigorovka and Serebryanka. Thus, small setbacks have also appeared in this sector. Overall, if we look at the past 24 hours, a significant number of strikes have been carried out on the Slavyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration and the settlement of Nikolaevka. Strikes were targeted at temporary deployment points. All these indicators suggest that in the near future, combat activity in this sector will only increase. At the same time, it is worth noting that today, the Chief of the General Staff of the Russian Federation, Valery Gerasimov, arrived in the area of responsibility of the southern group of forces, where he listened to reports. The usual interpretation is that he listened to reports and gave orders. However, there is a very high probability that in the near future, the southern group of forces will only intensify its offensive operations, and possibly Severodonetsk, Slavyansk, and Kramatorsk will become the focus of major combat operations for this group. Next, we move to the Toretsk-Konstantinovka direction. Here, it is worth noting a large number of geolocations. Artillery strikes are being carried out, UAF positions in the fields are being identified, drones are operating, and the positions of FPV drone operators on the Ukrainian side are being detected. In other words, a full-scale clearing of the bridgehead between the settlements of Pritichino, Ivanpole, Alexandra Shultina, and Belaya Gora is underway. The entire direction is being leveled so that Russian units can easily cross the Seversky-Donets-Donbass Canal and cut off the entire pocket between Chasiv Yar and the settlement of Toretsk, with an advance towards settlements such as Kleshchevka and the Klebenbyk Reservoir. It seems that in the near future, we can expect a high intensity of combat operations here. As for the Pokrovsk direction, Russian sources confirm that the fighting here is very intense, and Russian formations are struggling to advance further with the aim of capturing Pokrovsk and achieving a semi-encirclement. Despite the difficulties in the battles, some cartographers note the restoration of control over the settlement of Lisovka. Based on yesterday's video, some cartographers have marked the maps differently regarding this settlement. Today, we are receiving more information. It is possible that in the near future, Lisovka will be completely cleared of Ukrainian formations, and UAF units will be forced to retreat further north. Regarding the Dnipro direction, the Russian side is getting closer and closer to this line. Today, footage was published from almost the border between Dnipro and Donetsk, showing strikes on the forward positions of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, UAF, using the Sontsepyok thermobaric rocket launchers. The TOS Sontsepyok system was deployed, meaning we can see that combat operations are already taking place just a few hundred meters from the border. This is the Udaknoy direction. Additionally, it is possible that in the near future, we can expect an intensification of combat operations here. As for Konstantinovka and Ulakli, I remind you that yesterday the settlement came under the full control of the Russian Federation, A significant amount of footage was published showing the raising of Russian flags. However, the Ukrainian side stubbornly refuses to acknowledge the loss of the settlement, and Ukrainian sources still mark part of the settlement as either a grey zone or contested territory. But it appears that tonight, between February 22nd and 23rd, the settlement will finally be marked as under Russian control. At the same time, the first geolocation from the western part of the settlement of Andreevka has been received. The footage was published by the Ukrainian side. In these frames, we can see Ukrainian FPV drone operators carrying out a large number of strikes on the forward positions of the Russian army in the western part of the settlement. Based on objective control footage, we are now marking Andreevka as 99% under Russian control. There may still be some areas of the front where the situation is unclear, but in the near future, the situation here will likely become clearer as well. Next, we move toward Velikaya Novoselka, where the Russian army continues its offensive. The pace of the advance here is quite high, and the UAF is unable to stabilize the situation. Over the past 24 hours, the map has undergone changes again based on data from pro-Ukrainian, neutral, and pro-Russian cartographers. To summarize, according to, for example, pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russian army has managed to expand its control zone between Privolnoye and a stronghold located northwest of Velikaya Novoselka. However, according to their map, the grey zone on their side is marked as extending up to Berlatskoye. In other words, the pro-Ukrainian sources themselves report that over the past 24 hours there has been an advance by Russian formations, possibly even into the southeastern part of the settlement. This is why this area is marked as a grey zone. Pro-Russian sources have already shaded the entire forest belt from Berlatskoye southward in favor of the Russian Federation. So if we summarize everything published today by various cartographers and experts, it appears that Russian units are already operating within this semicircle. The first reconnaissance and sabotage groups have been noted in the Berlatskoye area. There are also reports of the first units entering the village of Skudnoye. This information is confirmed by pro-Russian sources. This does not mean that the entire territory within this semicircle is already under the control of the Russian Federation. Most likely, there are still scattered UAF groups here that are either resisting or attempting to escape from a possible semi-encirclement. However, it is safe to conclude that in the near future, everything within the red line will be marked as under Russian control, and combat operations will begin for this large cluster of small villages, starting from Privolnoye and ending at the settlement of Velikomikhailovka. It seems that Russian units will be advancing in this direction.